Today's presentation is Introduction to Search Engine Optimization, or SEO. And how I broke that out is I have 4 pillars that I kind of look at as the keys that you need to have in place for good search engine optimization. And if you've been to my website, I have a blog post on this very topic that kind of goes through some of this stuff. So you can definitely check that out after the presentation. But in today's presentation, I'll go a little bit deeper into some of these topics so you can learn a little bit more about them too. So without further ado, we'll get started here. So the agenda today, we're going to first talk about why is search engine optimization important, and then we'll go through those 4 different pillars, like I mentioned, that I see as good SEO. And at the end, we'll have time for questions. So quick about me, my name is James Roloff. I've been in the digital marketing space for a very long time, going back to middle school. I was building websites and whatnot. But more recently, the last 10, 15 years, I've been working with clients, helping them improve their SEO, digital marketing, as well as sales and business development too. So why is SEO important? And again, I think deep down, we all kind of know why it's important, but there's a lot of numbers to back that up too. So here's just a stat from Retailing Today saying that 81% of people research online before they purchase a product. And that's probably very common. I'm sure most of you on this presentation today do that as well. The first thing we do oftentimes when we're trying to buy something or solve a problem we have is go online, Google the problem, or Google for different products, or Google for product ideas even. And by the time that someone actually contacts a company to purchase, they're usually, pretty sure that they've already picked the product they want, pick the team they want to work with, whatever it might be, because most of us nowadays research online. So if you want to be found online, that's where search engine optimization comes into play. And I kind of call this like the era of in search of that. People born, well, I'm not going to put dates out there. Let's just say like a lot of us nowadays are in this in search of generation where we just kind of default to searching for things online. So some examples here of, like, what's the weather like tomorrow? Who has good pizza nearby? What events are happening this weekend? What's the best budgeting software? Who is the best CPA near me? We just get very used to pulling up our phone or going on our computer, going to the search bar and looking for things we want to find. So you, as a salesperson or marketing person or a leader in your company, you want to make sure that your website is being found because this is how most people are buying and researching nowadays. So the big shift there is really, customers are now searching for you instead of you searching for them via outbound methods. And I have a sales background, so I fully appreciate good outbound sales or good outbound marketing still. But this whole shift in mindset means people are searching for you and you want to be found in that process. And just to kind of show the impact of that as far as SEO and the ranking factor goes, this graph here shows the click-through rate is on the y-axis there. So that's the percent of people that click on that. And then the x-axis there is the exact position. So number 1 position, number 2, number 3. And you can see here when it comes to ranking on Google, it really is a winner take most scenario. So if you're not in that top 5, you're not really going to get any clicks at all. And if you're not even the top, 1 or 2, that's where, between the number 1 and number 2 position, you're looking at about 50% of clicks. So that's why it's really, really important to focus on SEO, is that people are looking for products and services online, and having a good optimized site means you're actually going to get found to get clicks. So these are the 4 pillars that I see as good search engine optimization. But before I dive into them, I want to just put out a big idea, and we'll talk about this at the end too. The big idea for search engine optimization in general is that Google wants to show the best results to their visitors. The reason that all of us go to Google, we don't go to Ask Jeeves or Yahoo or Bing. We trust the results at Google because Google is really good at providing good results. So what that means is they're trying to always find the most relevant results with the best user experience and giving them to their users in order to get them to come back again in the future. Obviously, Google's trying to sell ads as part of that process too, but we wouldn't even use Google and be exposed to those ads if the results they had weren't good. So what I'm trying to say here, I guess, is just that your role in trying to optimize your content for search engines should always go back to, how do I be the best result? Because if you're not the best result, over time, you're going to lose that ranking, even if you're able to kind of nudge up there a little bit too. Over time, if you're not always showing the best result or one of the best results, you're going to lose that ranking. So that's just a big idea I want to throw out there before we dive into all the gobbledygook that comes with SEO. Something to kind of chew on. So the 4 pillars I look at, Number one is content. So the actual content on your website. Number two is user experience. So what's that user experience for a user, from mobile friendliness factor, speed factor, all of that. Number three is links. That's a whole different topic we'll dive into with domain authority, backlinks. And then number four is crawlability. That's the ability for your website to be crawled by search engines using their bots. So let's dive right into number one, which is content. And content is king. Really, one of the pillars here, if you don't have the content on your website that's relevant for the search, you're not going to be found, right? Like, it kind of going back to that user experience thing with Google. If you're not the best result, you're not going to be found. If you don't even have the right content on your website, you're not going to be found too. So this includes your page titles, your headers, your body text, your navigation, anything that's content on your website. It has to contain relevant keywords for that Google search and for that query that someone's searching. So I have an example here, the New York Times website. So if you Googled, is it better to rent or buy, talking about houses, this is the number one result that shows up. And this is from the New York Times. They have this rent or buy calculator. So you can see here, this is the actual page itself. You can see a lot of content on it, a lot of text, but a lot of images, a lot of good formatting on there, and a lot of things that include keywords that are relevant to that search. And when I say relevant, Google's smart enough in their algorithm to know, if you search for George Washington or first president of the United States, those are all things that Google's able to see as relevant topics. So in this case, was it better to rent or buy? As we kind of dissect this page a little bit, you'll see that some words like buying or renting, that's still applicable for that key phrase, rent or buy, because Google knows there's an association between those keywords. So dissecting this one page a little bit further to see the content on it, this is the title tag or the main heading in the page. Is it better to rent or buy? So you can see they optimize this page specifically for that query. And this is the title content, so it's going to be seen as a very important thing in Google's eyes. Going down a little further, you can see the headings here: buying, renting. So again, using those keywords again. In the actual body text, you'll see a lot more keywords that relate to the topic of renting or buying a house. So down payment, investments, choosing to rent, how much are home prices. So all these keywords that have relevancy for that main topic. Is it better to rent or buy? But you're going to see a lot more of those obscure keywords that might build into that overall relevancy for them too. And one way I like to do content in general is what I call the content matrix. So that's when you're looking at, how do I build content on my website that's relevant for my audience? I put the buyer persona on one axis, and then my buyer stages or buyer's journey on another one. And then you go down and fill out those boxes of what kind of content your buyers need at each stage of their buying process. I do have a whole mini course on this on my website, so you can check it out. It's free and you have access to it. And I actually have a template document you can use for this too. But this is a really good way to make sure that you have the right content on your website for your audience. So some content tips: use variations of related keywords to increase relevancy. So don't just use the same keyword over and over again, use variations of it. Every page should have a minimum of 300 words. If you don't, you can get actually docked from an SEO standpoint for having what's called thin content. Try to publish new content at least monthly. So Google looks at the aliveness factor of your website. So if your website hasn't been updated in 6 months, 12 months, that's going to hurt you for SEO too. And then try to write for a specific targeted audience, so that your content is actually relevant and that it actually provides a good experience for a certain, demographic or buyer that you're going after. So that's content. Pillar number 2 is user experience. And this has been a big topic recently, especially for mobile friendliness as well as accessible design too. So we'll pop through and kind of talk through what that means. Again, going back to that big idea, why it matters for Google, they want to provide a good user experience to their visitors that are using their search engine, so they come back and enjoy using the search engine and find the results helpful. For you as a marketing person or as a salesperson or business owner, it comes back to making sure that you're providing a good user experience so that people go to your website, they read the content, and they convert into a lead. So everybody wants a good user experience, obviously, including the user itself. So what makes up a user experience, or what makes up a user experience, at least in the eyes of SEO? So page speed is a big one. I'll talk about that in a minute. Mobile usability, accessible design, and then content readability. So I'll pop through some examples here on those. So speed, more recently, Google announced what they're using for speed calculations, and they call it Core Web Vitals. They have largest contentful paint first input delay, cumulative layout shift. The moral of the story is we're trying to look at is how fast does a page appear? How fast can someone interact with that page? And then when's the last time that page shifts? Like you've probably been like news websites are really bad at this. You get to a news website and then ads keep popping up and things keep shifting even after the page is loaded too. So those are all things that Google looks at, and you can actually use Google's tools. They have a page speed insights tool, so you can actually see how your website's performing here. There's no magic bullet, even like a lot of Google's websites perform really poorly on these tests, but you just want to make sure you don't have any glaring issues with speed that's preventing a good user experience. Mobile friendliness kind of goes without saying, but your website has to be mobile friendly. A lot of people are using mobile devices now, and that'll hurt your SEO if you don't have a mobile friendly website. Accessible, so making sure people with disabilities can access your website and get the content, as best they possibly can. There's a whole bunch of things to go into this, and it's honestly not really my forte. I have here the example of just like text contrast and making sure it's readable for someone who might be colorblind or visually impaired. But there's, mental disabilities, there's audio disabilities, there's cognitive disabilities that might affect someone's ability to comprehend some things. There's a lot of stuff that goes into that. That's more of a web development thing, but just know as far as SEO goes, you want to make sure you're aware of that and optimizing your site. I shouldn't even say optimizing, making sure your website is performing in a way that allows people with disabilities to access it. And then formatting, we'll talk about this later on too, but here's an example from my website. The more you format your website, the better it's going to appear, and better user experience it's going to be too. So you can see here on the left side of the screen, I have no headers, no bolded lists, that kind of stuff too, just plain text. On the right side, I actually have the list formatted. I have a header there. It's much easier to read. So that's good from a user experience standpoint, but Google's robots can actually see that formatting too, and they're going to give you some extra benefit just by having your website formatted. So some tips for user experience. Ensure your website is mobile friendly. Keep your page times load as slow as or as fast as possible. Design your website to be accessible for those with disabilities. I didn't mention it, but also follow security best practices. So making sure you're using SSL for your website to be encrypted, and that you don't have any glaring, embeds that are a security issue too. All right, so the next one, links. This is a pretty in-depth topic that gets kind of crazy. So I'm gonna try and keep it fairly high level for this discussion. I like to start out kind of talking about authority. So I don't know if you're a Dave Ramsey fan or if you even know who Dave Ramsey is, but he is a personal finance expert. He hates debt. That's kind of his thing, is help people get out of debt. So he's kind of known in the world of personal finance as this guy that if you want to get out of debt, he's the guy to go to. He's got books, a radio show, all of that kind of thing too. So in the real physical world, Dave Ramsey has authority. People look at him as an authoritative figure on the idea of getting out of debt. So the same thing kind of works for the digital world. You have the real authority in the real world, and you have digital authority in the digital world. And the more your work is referenced, the more people point to your work, point to your website, point to your pages, the more authority you're going to build up. And Google sees those links coming into your website as a way of saying this person's being referenced, this person's being sourced, or this website in this case, and they have high authority. So you can see here, if you search the term how to get out of debt, Dave Ramsey ranks always top 5 on there because his website has a lot of links going to it for people talking about how to get out of debt. So how authority is measured is 2 main ways. There's domain authority and page authority. Very similar things though. So domain authority is the overall quality and quantity of links from other websites linking to any page on your website. And then page authority is the overall quality and quantity of links linking to that specific page on your website. So the moral of the story there is looking at quality and quantity of links, but domain authority and page authority are 2 separate topics. I did this really bad chart that I'll improve on over time to kind of illustrate this point. But let's say we have website 1, website 2, website 3. At the top there, you can see the domain authority. So website 1 is a low authority website. It's got a 15 rank between 1 and 100 is kind of the ranking there. Website 2 is a high authority site. So that might be like NewYorkTimes.com or Forbes.com. Website 3 is domain authority of 38. So that might be like a business or small business that's doing a lot of digital marketing. And you can see with my bad arrows there that as pages have their own authority, they kind of they inherit some authority from their domain. So if a domain does a really good job, they're going to inherit some of that juice from it. But as they link to other websites and other pages, they will provide additional authority to those pages. So as a higher authority or higher domain website links to you, that's going to help your domain authority and your page authority more so than if a lower domain authority website links to you. So it really is all about, that clout and that the resource level of that website is linking to you. So you should always try and get links from any source, but the higher up, the more relevant the source. We're here in Madison, Wisconsin, and the university's here in town too. So I always tell my local clients, if they're able to get links from the university website or local government website, that's going to be a good high authority website specifically for local SEO. And you can do the same thing with your industry, depending what the keywords might be, or what players or what websites your industry might be high authority for you too. So hopefully that makes sense. The moral story there is really trying to get more links from high authority websites. I have an example here from a client SEO analysis I recently did. And this is some of the top links that were going to some of their competitors. So you can see here that Forbes.com and the PA is page authority and DA is domain authority. So you can see how it's different. But on those individual links, you can see that there's different anchor text. So that's the actual text that was used to link. And those are all things that Google looks at. They look at what's the anchor text, what's the website, what's that page authority, and what's that domain authority. And that's all the kind of stuff that gets passed on to your website too. So there's tools out there you can use like this to look at information. Again, if you're a SEO manager for a big company or a big website, you might live and breathe links all day long. But for the majority of us, that SEO is just one part of our job that we do, one of the many hats we wear. The goal really is trying to get more links if possible. So some tips: actively seek backlinks from partner organizations. So if your company sponsors nonprofits or is taking part in some sort of local chamber, whatever things you might be involved in, making sure they're linking back to your website whenever possible. Publishing independent research or unique content helps a lot. So if you can actually have a good blog article or good white paper that other websites link to you just to link to that one topic, that's a great way to build up authority and build up links. And then add links to your content, linking out to other relevant sources. So inbound links matter a lot, and that builds up a lot of your authority, but outbound links matter too. So you want to make sure that you're using links whenever possible, whenever it makes sense to actually link to a source. So if you're citing some sort of research or like a Wikipedia page, whatever it might be, linking out to that within your blog post is a good thing to do too. All right, and finally, number 4, crawlability, letting the robots do their work. So the way that search engines index the web is they basically have these things called robots, but they're just servers that go through and they crawl through websites. They click on links, they go to other websites, and that's actually how they find new websites and new pages, is by clicking on links, not clicking on, but their servers scan the links and go to that next thing too. So they scan the websites and then they take that content and index it based on relevancy and based on that domain authority and based on that user experience. So that's kind of how that works. And then I'm going to give you a whole bunch of gobbledygook that hopefully makes some sense to you. How they crawl your website, there's different parts of your website that they use to crawl. So there's a file called robots.txt. This file tells search engines how to crawl your website, which pages not to go to. So a common thing there, example I'll give you is like, if you use WordPress as your content management system or any content management system, Joomla, Drupal, some .NET thing, a lot of times that robot.txt file tells Google or Yahoo or whatnot not to go to your admin section. Don't index that section. It's not something you should go to. Other times it might have other rules that tells it like, do go here, don't go here, categorize this as hidden, whatever it might be too. So you shouldn't have to worry about that if you have a good tool on your website to take care of that. Sitemap. So your website should have a sitemap. And so when that crawler or that robot goes to your website, it'll read the sitemap, and that sitemap will actually say, here's how I want you to index the content. Here's the different layers of things. Here's where the media is. Here's where the pages are. Here's where the categories are. Again, if you're using a good SEO tool on your website, it'll probably automatically generate that for you. CSS styling. So that's like the styling on your website. It talks about headers, bold text looking, fonts, title tags. Those are all things that are actually built into the design of your website. That hierarchy is something that Google looks at, or the search engine looks at, to understand content and understand visually. Because obviously these servers, these robots, they can't visually see your website. All they see is code. So they use this CSS styling to understand the visual hierarchy of your website and content. And then you have on-page content. So text, images, links, navigation. These are all the content signals that Google uses to index your website. And then metadata. So this is the data on your pages, the multimedia that provides the additional context for what things might be. So there's meta titles, meta descriptions, and there's alt text and all these different things that live on your website. Again, if you have a good SEO tool installed within your content management system, you should be able to edit these things. But I just want to call out that is part of the way that Google crawls your website too. And then finally, the manual instructions that might show up, so like redirects and things like that. That's all stuff that Google might use as part of that crawling process too. So just some kind of notes here. This goes back to that earlier section about content too, but making sure from a crawlability standpoint, your website has good page formatting so that it understands what's actual hierarchy, what content should be ranked higher, or I shouldn't say ranked higher, but weighted higher in the indexing. So those are all things to think about as part of your formatting for your SEO. Again, my example I showed earlier, but you can see on the left side there, they would just see all body text, where on the right side, it would actually see a title, headers, lists. So it would actually use that content and help index a page better using that styling. I have a picture here from a client website or past client website. This is an SEO tool. I used to install a tool called Yoast in SEO. So here's where you edit like your meta title, your meta description. And you can see here at the very top of that example, that's how it would show up in Google, is that blue text is your meta title. The gray text below it is the actually meta description. So my suggestion there is always to make sure that in that meta description, it's more of a call to action, basically explaining to visitors why they should click on your link, because this is going to show up on that search results page. So you want to make sure you're using good keywords in there, but also making a good call to action too, to inspire people to click on your link versus somebody else's. So some tips on crawlability: host an accurate robots.txt file, ensure redirects and URL structures are working properly, set up correct permissions across your server to make sure that the robots can actually access everything. Use accurate headers and CSS designations just to make sure that the actual content is being crawled with the correct hierarchy too. So the 4 pillars again: content. Do you have relevant content on your website for your audience? User experience. Does your website provide a good user experience for your audience? And then links. Do you have links going to your website or pointing to your website that illustrate that you have high authority on subject matter? And then crawlability. Can Google or Bing's robots crawl your website and actually access the content they need to access? So just going back to that main point again, your goal is to be the best result. And you should be asking yourself these questions. Would your audience find your content helpful? Does your website provide a good user experience? And can search engines view and crawl your content? Those are kind of the basic things to think about. If all of the web development is done correctly on your website, and the CSS is set up correctly, you have sitemaps, all that kind of stuff, most SEO comes back to the content and the links. But I talk about the 4 pillars of SEO because if one of them's missing, if you have good content, it's crawled good, you have a lot of good inbound links, but your page speed takes 5 seconds to load, you're not going to show up on the first page. So it really is, you have to get all 4 pillars done right, which a lot of times means going back and looking at your weakest pillar to start with, and then say, okay, I need to work on this first, and then kind of go out. But at the end of the day, it really is like, what can I do to be the best result for my audience? Quick note before I get to questions too. I am doing SEO analysis for clients too. So if you need help with your website and you're trying to understand where you're at right now and kind of get basically a punch list of what you should work on, I'm always happy to work with clients on that stuff. I'll go through, do a technical analysis, do a link analysis, and kind of highlight some things that you should be doing to your website. So if you have any questions on that, you can go to my website. I'll have the link here in a second, and contact me there. I'll be happy to help you at your company too. So that's what I had for you today. I will pause now quick to see what questions people have. And feel free to pop them right into LinkedIn or on YouTube if that is where you're joining from. See one question here. What are the tools you use? So free tools, the best ones are Google Search Console is Google's tool that allows you to see how your website's being indexed. That's more of a technical tool that basically says, here's how Google is interpreting the technical aspects of your website. So that's a really good free tool. Everybody who's in any kind of SEO position should have Google Search Console set up for their website. Otherwise, there's a lot of good like ranking and paid tools out there. So Moz, M-O-Z is one of my favorites, SEMrush. And there's a bunch of other tools related to like speed. So Google has a good page speed insights tool they have. There's another one. How's it called? So a metrics tool. I can post a link to it in the comments here later too. But Google Page Speed Insights is a really good one, strictly for page speed, that I would definitely check out too. And then obviously there's things like Google Analytics and whatnot. That's not Google Analytics is more for on-page optimization and looking at how people are interacting with you on your website, where Google Search Console is more of like how are you performing before they get to your website on the actual search engine itself too, if that makes sense. It's a good question. Pause. Any more questions? Obviously, too, I should note, if other questions come up as you're going through the process of looking at your website, looking at those 4 pillars and how it relates to your website and your search engine optimization, feel free to shoot me an email as things come up too. I'm always happy to answer specific questions or point people to resources in that process too. There's just so many different facets of where you can go down and how you could potentially, optimize things. But like I said, I like to look at a more holistic approach. How am I doing across all 4 pillars? Is there one that's really messed up right now that's preventing me from ranking at all? So obviously focus on that one first. But once you have the basics in place, it really comes down to just good content and having good content that's relevant for your audience too. All right, so got a question from Quinn here. So how would you start identifying topics to focus on in content and blog posts? I go back to that content matrix I referenced earlier. Like I said, I do have a free mini course on my website too. I like to look at that and say, okay, who is my audience? And then at each stage of the buyer's journey, what kind of content would be helpful for them? Because that really is a good brainstorming activity that allows you to think of new ways to generate ideas for content for blog posts. Another way I like to look at it that I suggest to clients all the time too is asking what are the top 5 questions that our prospects ask us during the sales process, and then asking again during a brainstorming discussion what are the top 5 questions our prospects should be asking us that they're not asking during that sales process. And also another good one is this: what are the top 5 things that I'm most excited about for our industry that you can write about too? So it's coming down to brainstorming. If you're looking for like specific keyword research, that comes down to using like keyword tools, keyword planners. So you might search a keyword that's related to your industry and then seeing up related queries to that and then trying to optimize posts for those too. So that's kind of the more of that like technical deep dive SEO, but that's an option too. All right. So Hannah said, I work for 3 associations, multiple websites. Would Google recognize the different websites if we link to each other? Secondly, we have 2 blogs that drive users away from the website. I believe this is incorrect. So Google looks at the domain level. So the domain is really the heart of your SEO, where your authority builds out. So if your website has 3 different domains, you are kind of spreading yourself out SEO thin-wise. So I would say if you can combine all of your organizations onto one domain, that's going to help a lot with SEO just to get everything together. If you're linking back and forth a lot, Google's going to see those links going back and forth, but it's not a one-to-one passing of authority, if that makes sense. So I always recommend companies try to keep it to one domain, unless you have very distinct brands or like, essentially different operating entities, different audiences, different content altogether. That's a different thing. But if possible, I would try to keep it on one domain. Same thing with the blogs too, just from a user experience standpoint. I think a lot of companies created separate blogs because like that's what, back in the day, a blog was a separate thing. But if you can have your blog on your website, that's going to help both from a user experience standpoint. So you have all your call to actions, all of your different, main navigation directly on your blog too, but also from an SEO standpoint too. All that content is going to live on the same domain and have a closer tie from an authority standpoint to that main website of yours, which I'm assuming you want to drive people to that main website as part of your blogging strategy. I guess on that note too, I will say that I would avoid trying to make major edits to your user experience and functionality in the name of SEO. It should always be kind of the other way around, where you should focus on user experience and good content and have the SEO kind of follow. I've seen some pretty bad implementations of SEO tips and tricks that end up making the user experience poor or making it hard for people to actually get good content too. It's a good question. Any other questions? Otherwise, I appreciate everyone joining today. Hopefully information was helpful. Like I said, feel free if you have any questions, reach out to me. My website is there, as well as my email address. I'd be happy to talk to you specifically about your business or your website as well. Or again, provide any resources I can as part of that process. So thanks again and have a good day.